And at the time of this event, my client was not in any sort of therapy.
Now, as of now, we are still waiting on the judge's decision, and of course, we'll bring it to you when it is announced. Let me bring back in my guest, former trial and appellate attorney Dr. Tracy A. Pearson. Tracy, you know, this is a difficult one. This is a kid who obviously has mental issues. He's seeking the insanity defense, although that doesn't play into this particular decision by the judge. Your thoughts on where someone like this young man, 15 years old, and I want to remind our viewers, when he's in adult detention, he is on his own all day. He is not allowed, according to law, to have any contact at all with the adult population, and that goes for sight and sound. So he's on his own. He does have a counselor who testified today, said she goes and sees him a couple of times a week. He cannot speak to his parents because, of course, they are in the same facility, but they're charged as well. Your thoughts on this situation? It's a tough one.
You know, I've done quite a few placement hearings, and when it comes to why someone is incarcerated pending trial, there's two issues. One, are you a flight risk? Or two, are you a danger to the community? And the idea that one would transfer him to a juvenile facility, which is less restrictive, and subject him to a community of children that he is alleged that are like or similar to those that he is alleged to have terrorized and murdered would be unjust and I think harmful to those children, which the court needs to take into consideration. They aren't just looking at the defendant, but also at the facility and what it would take to keep him safe, as well as the care for the people who are already in that facility, because there's a higher duty to juveniles.
Yeah, actually, you make a fantastic point, because today the manager of Children's Village testified, and she said that not only do they have staffing issues there, so they're short staff, right? People are allowed to move freely around that facility. There would be a safety plan in place, but she's not sure what effect bringing this particular inmate into that environment would have on everything else. And she said things are always sort of on that borderline, so you don't want to mix it up. And as of right now, there are no other inmates at Children's Village charged with murder. And so when you start thinking about it in that sense and what effect it could have on those kids there, it almost rings out for this judge to keep him in adult detention, don't you think?
Yes, it does. I mean, there are consequences for actions. Now, granted, you know, this trial that he is going to experience is going to determine liability, criminal liability, and responsibility. But there are consequences for behavior, and he is incarcerated for a reason, and he is incarcerated where he belongs. He was charged with 24 crimes. It's my understanding 4 people were alleged to have been murdered, and there were 7 people alleged to have been injured. This is incredibly serious. And being in a juvenile facility affords you certain privileges that you simply wouldn't have in an adult population jail.
Yeah, absolutely. The only issue I have here, doctor, is that, you know, they're charging the parents because they didn't pay attention to his mental health issues. So clearly they know he has these. It was clear today that he would get more help at the juvenile facility. So it's almost counterintuitive for them now to argue to keep him in the adult facility.
Yes, I mean, I think that he should have visitation with his parents. Believe it or not, we see, you know, children who have parents who've been accused of abuse or neglect against themselves by the state have visitation under supervision. So there is the possibility of being able to do that. I understand a concern about witness tampering, but I think there are ways to get around that, to get him some contact with somebody that he trusts, in theory.
Yeah, because certainly isolation can't be the answer. But again, there are all these other factors, and I think that may be the right place. We're waiting on the judge's decision. As soon as we find out, we'll let folks know. All right, doctor, stand by. We're going to take a break. Coming up, we asked you online, where do you think Ethan Crumbley would be better served, in a juvenile facility or adult detention? We're going to hear your answers when we come back. Keep it right here on Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
Tonight on Closing Argument.
It is time now for today's Talk Back segment. Each day, we post a question on Court TV's social media pages. We gather your comments and questions and respond right here on the show. Today, there was a placement hearing in Michigan for alleged school shooter Ethan Crumbley. The question in front of the judge, should the teen be moved to a juvenile facility while he awaits trial? So we asked you, where do you think Ethan Crumbley would be better served? In a juvenile facility or adult detention? Still with me, former trial and appellate attorney, Dr. Tracy Pearson. All right, Tracy, let's go to our first comment. It comes from Killian Salter. He says, solitary confinement is inhumane treatment, and jails are restricted from housing juveniles with adults. Move him. That was the point I was making earlier. That makes this a little bit more difficult. It's hard to curry any kind of favor for this kid based on what he did, obviously. But when you think about this 15-year-old in solitary confinement, no contact with his parents, only contact with a counselor a couple of times a week, you have to wonder about whether that's good for him.
In these situations where children are in juvenile detention centers, they aren't like Disney World. They have cells. They're in those cells. Those cells are locked, especially in more restrictive environments within those institutions. So it isn't as if he is going to be walking around freely at a juvenile center. He's going to be in similar circumstances to some degree.
Yeah, and that was what one of the testimony of that manager was. She said we would have a safety plan in place, obviously. Our next comment comes from Lynn Sessler. She says he definitely doesn't need to be around any more children after he killed 4 of them. And that, to me, is the number one reason why you keep him out of that youth facility. The judge mentioned it in his previous hearing. He has to have one of these hearings every 30 days, by the way, according to the juvenile justice law in Michigan. The last time the judge said, you know, the fact that the kids are basically around the same age of the kids he killed, yeah, it's a pretty good reason.
It's going to be very disruptive to that institution and to those children. Children who are in juvenile detention centers, while I can't say all of them, many of them are there that have past traumas. And having him there could very much trigger them and create more emotional disruption for these kids than they already have.
Yeah, and I did some work earlier on in my career in the juvenile justice system, and a lot of them have some slight mental issues, things that very easily they get triggered. That's part of the reason they're in the situation that they're in. So it can be quite a powder keg under those circumstances. All right, our next comment comes from Takashi Thompson. She says a cement cell with a glass door is better than the coffin that he put his victims in. And I think at the end of the day, Doctor, that sums it up pretty well. Again, as I said, hard to curry any favor for this kid at this point.
Yes, and he's alive. That isn't always the case with people who have alleged to have committed these types of crimes. Oftentimes they are taken down and are neutralized, is the term law enforcement uses. So he's alive, and he should be grateful for that.
Yes, exactly, and I could not agree with you more. All right, Dr. Pearson, thank you so much for being with me tonight. Truly a pleasure having you on the show. We got to have you back again soon.
Thank you very much, Michael.
All right, I'm Michael Ayala. It's been a pleasure being with you as well. Coming up next in Closing Arguments, Vinnie Politan takes a look at today's guilty verdict in the federal trial of the 3 men who killed Ahmaud Arbery. You don't want to miss it, and there's a lot more legal stories for you as well. Keep it right here on Court TV, your front row seat to justice.
Stay tuned.